Watch this.
Words matter, and some lawmakers are saying they should matter to you when it comes to a possible constitutional amendment. Being a resident doesn't make you a citizen, but does that mean your opinion shouldn't matter either?
When our customers put in onion orders, we expect to ship them loads of the best onions that they can get.
And these days, that might mean the best chemical-free onions they can get. So how can you grow commercially without herbicides? How about sharks with lasers? Okay, how about just lasers? Speaking of weeds, there is one you need to avoid, and it seems to be spreading all over Idaho. Ancient philosophers aren't the only ones who need to worry about it. In the recap of Idaho's GOP convention yesterday, we ran through some of their resolutions that passed, and just in a throwaway line, we mentioned how one of those resolutions is wanting only citizens to vote in our elections. It was even part of the updated Idaho Republican Party platform. And as we said yesterday, what comes out of these conventions, we could likely see coming to the State House next legislative session. However, this specific issue was actually addressed last session. House Joint Resolution 5 is a constitutional amendment that would make it clear only Idaho residents who are citizens of the United States can vote in any election held in Idaho. A constitutional amendment means it's up to the voters to decide, but some lawmakers worry the language of this provision isn't as clear-cut as it's intended, or if it is, what that could actually mean. Here's Joe Paris to explain.
The sounds of summer sound a little different on the diamond than at the Idaho State House.
Yeah, this is some inside baseball, but stuff people should know.
On that topic this week, a council of Idaho lawmakers met to finalize language for a constitutional amendment set for the November ballot. Passing the legislature and ending up on your ballot as HJR 5, it looks to add to the state constitution a provision that says, quote, only Idaho residents who are citizens of the United States are qualified voters, and that non-citizens are not eligible to vote in any election held within the state.
There really aren't non-citizens voting in our elections in any measurable numbers that I'm aware of. But this makes people feel good that non-citizens aren't going to steal our elections. The problem to me is that I think they botched the language.
The language House Minority Leader Alana Rubel was referring to comes in the pro-con section. Voters are given a nonpartisan list of arguments for and against to help them decide which direction they want to vote in. But Representative Rubel says that didn't quite happen. Quickly, though, let's go back to the ballot question.
And here's the key language: in any election held within the state of Idaho. That goes a lot broader than what our Constitution says right now. A vote for your HOA board is an election held within the state of Idaho. An election for student council at your local middle school is an election held within the state of Idaho.
Rubel said Democrats wanted to include language to tell voters about their concerns about the quote-unquote any election provision. She said they were denied.
We are not going to let you put your anti-statements into the official statement that goes out to voters, so that the voters will not get the actual argument against it. They will get this version that the people who want the thing to pass will allow you to see.
We basically deal with managing the issues of the legislature during the interim.
Senate Pro Tem Republican Chuck Winder was also a part of the Legislative Council meeting. He sees the end result differently.
And it seems to be like every time we go through this, there's always, it kind of gets politicized, but it starts out with, a nonpartisan staff attorney drafting the language, and that's where we ended up, basically, was going back to that language.
Winder says final language actually came from a neutral drafter.
Well, I think it's pretty fair. Again, if you try to do anything by committee, which is what was going on yesterday, everybody had a great idea about this word or that word, or, we ought to add this or that, take this out. But what we came back to was, hey, we have professional staff that are nonpartisan that wrote it. And we came back to that point of view, and that's the language that's out there.
Of course, I don't want non-citizens voting in gubernatorial elections or voting for president or anything like that. But I think the answer is not to put super sloppy language into the Constitution.
Well, I think it's a misread. We're basically amending a portion of the Constitution that applies to public elections. It doesn't apply to other elections.
This is an effort to solve a pretty largely non-existent problem, but I think it would create a very real problem by putting in hugely overbroad, sloppy language into our Constitution.
So this will be on your ballot coming up in November. And Brian, to go back a little bit to that pro-con that we're talking about, this isn't a new thing. Anytime there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot in Idaho, voters will see a list of pro and con arguments. And what the Democrats and Rubel is arguing, that the con argument should include this idea that if this passes, it could mean that in your HOA election, well, maybe you have to be a citizen of Idaho.
If you're a resident, not a citizen, but a non-citizen resident, you have a kids going to school, you probably should have a say in what goes on at the school board. But I guess it's all going to hinge on that term. If it's included in the language, public election, is that in there?
It's just in any election in Idaho. Now, you heard what the Senate Pro Tem said, though, that it's in the part of the Constitution that deals with public elections.
Okay.
Like so many things that come out of that building, we will find out if it passes and if it goes to court.
All right. We'll see what happens, but thanks, Joe. There is a decision expected this week or next, speaking of what happens, coming from the U.S. Supreme Court, one that could impact how doctors in Idaho treat a pregnant woman facing an emergency complication with her pregnancy. From the moment Idaho's abortion ban became law back in August of 2022, it has become the subject of a lawsuit from the Department of Justice claiming it violates the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, or EMTALA. The Supreme Court heard arguments in this case back in April, and their ruling is supposed to come down before the end of June. In light of that, we are going to be taking an in-depth look at the impacts Idaho's near-total abortion ban has had in its nearly 2 years of existence.
The majority of a decision-making process is mainly between a patient and their clinician. Here, there's a third party that we just need to talk about with every consult. The third party in the room is the decisions that have made outside of this room that impact what you can and can't do in the state.
I mean, there's what people want, and then there's a set of realities as far as what can get passed and what can't.
So beginning tomorrow, here on the 208, we're going to bring you the perspective of the lawmakers who made it happen, the doctors who have to straddle it every day, and the patients who've had to face it head on. And should a ruling from the Supreme Court come down anytime over the next few days, we're going to bring that to you too. Well, it's that time of year when Idaho's crop growers are weeding their fields, and typically a 12-week process. Historically, that task started with hand weeding, right? It evolved to hand spraying and then machine spraying, which is still what most growers are doing to get rid of the weeds in their fields. But now there's a new thermal tool is doing it for them. Well, some of them, because it's rare and it's pricey, but it's worth it, according to one Idaho farm that has access to one of these 84 laser weeding robots. Aspen Shumpert went out to a western Idaho onion field to see this laser in action and hear how it's helping their operators.
A 20-foot deck on the back of a tractor, lasers killing weeds.
When the weeds are incredibly small, and by incredibly small, I'm talking about size of a dime. Dime or smaller, you want to get in and hit them then, because if you don't, then you're going to run into issues where the weeds will just run rampant.
He says the problem with weeds are not the weeds itself, but the cost of chemicals and labor. A problem Carbon Robotics wanted to solve.
The best way to figure that out was by using a laser to kill them.
It's a combination of AI, cameras, sensors, and tractor power.
So by using the AI and deep learning, it's able to determine the difference between a crop and a weed, and then tell the lasers to ultimately eliminate the weed within a millimeter of the crop.
The tractor operator watches the tablet inside the tractor, which tells them how fast to drive based on the weed density in the field. Right now, the technology focuses on just specialty crops and can identify about 100 different ones.
We are currently running on leafy veg, onions, carrots. Those would be round out the top 3.
In this field, the laser is targeting broadleaf, purslane, goat heads, and puncture vine. At Obendorf Farms, their tractor sprayer has an 80-foot span and can spray more acres more quickly than the laser can zap, compared to the laser weeder, which only hits about 6 rows at a time, but it runs all day and all night, making it the quickest form of weeding.
In a field like the one we're in right now with about 50 acres, this would probably take us a little over 30 hours.
The tool costs upwards of $1 million, but Obendorf Farms partnered with the farm in Texas to split the bill.
When you have a northern hem and a southern hem, they might only be using this for 12, 14 weeks out of the year. So to split the cost of the unit, it's ideal to find a partner down south so that they can then use it for their piece of the season that's opposite from, up here in the Treasure Valley.
Cole says the tool will head south in about 3 to 4 weeks. When it's done, the goal is to have a better product at the end.
We're trying to figure out how we can get our onions in the field to be the best they can be. Sometimes you got to start at the beginning. And so we wanted to limit the amount of herbicide that we're actually using on our onions and keep them in full growth mode instead of rehab mode throughout the season.
Obendorf still sprays pesticides and fungicides, but for now, herbicides they'll shield spray in between their rows and laser weed directly next to their crops so that the chemicals no longer make contact with the onions.
I think as labor becomes harder to find and more expensive, this is ultimately the future of weed control in farming.
The Carbon Robotics company has been selling these tools for just about 3 years. 84 of them have been sold across the country. Again, 2 of those live here in the Treasure Valley. They're designed in Seattle and built in Detroit. Brian.
Okay, so I hadn't seen that video before, but I was not expecting the puffs of smoke of the weeds actually getting obliterated right there on site.
And that's exactly what you were seeing, is the laser hitting those weeds and you're seeing smoke come up.
Okay, so the expensiveness part of this, I mean, ultimately the goal is to save money.
Right.
Is that happening?
I think that's going to have to be a wait and see. Again, this is the first season that Obendorf Farms is using the laser weeder, so ideally that's what they want, but most importantly, they want a healthier crop. So if the machine does both of those for them, we'll have to check back in and see if, 1, it saved them money, and 2, their onions were better.
All right, super interesting. Thanks, Aspen. You know, I was thinking of the immortal words of Socrates when he said, "I drank what?" It's one of the favorite lines from one of my favorite movies, Real Genius with Val Kilmer. But it's also a funny way to get into a very serious topic, poison hemlock. Mother Nature also has a funny way of warning us who live here about plants and animals that are dangerous. Bright colors, certain patterns, that kind of stuff. Think of the Venus flytrap or poison tree frogs. However, hemlock, it's not nearly as flashy, but it is potentially just as deadly. Sophia Bliss, you're here right now to talk about what we need to know about this weed that is becoming more pervasive around the state.
It really has, and particularly this year. So you may have seen it, this tall plant with dainty white flowers, maybe as you're driving around. And as tempting as it may be to stop and pick some and put it in a vase, it can be deadly to people and animals.
Anecdotally, at least, it certainly seems like this is a year where poison hemlock is spreading really fast. Since they grow really tall, up to 9 feet tall, they love ditches, damp areas, like marshy areas, anywhere near a river or creek. You'll see a lot of poison hemlock. They have a white umbrella-shaped flower, fern-like, really dark green leaves. We want to make sure that people understand that the entire plant is actually toxic to humans and livestock.
Again, the entire plant is toxic, not just the leaves, not just the stem, all of it. The approach to dealing with these plants on your property is a bit of a juxtaposition because ideally you wouldn't touch it, but according to Idaho law, if it's on your property, it's your responsibility to remove it to hopefully prevent it from spreading further.
One thing that can be really helpful is wearing a heavy vinyl glove that's chemical safe, and that can help prevent any skin irritation that people might have while handling the plants and removing them from their properties.
Brockway says it's a good idea to wash your hands because the plant residue on your hands can make you sick. He also adds some general advice for removal is to spray it when it's small and to cut it when it's tall. You can report infestations on public land to Ada County Weed, Pest, and Mosquito Abatement. Their number is 208-577-4646. And Brian, this little plant may be a bit, I'm assuming, you might even think it looks like baby's breath or something that you want to have around your house, but definitely not safe to have around your house. Again, poisonous for people and animals.
Poisonous, like ingesting, or just, like I said, you have to wear gloves. The worry is that then you touch your eyes and mouth and that kind of stuff?
Right, the worry would be that you ingest the residue on your hands, and then that's the part that would be toxic to you. So it's not fully that every single person is having skin irritation, just removing the residue from your hands.
All right, so be on the lookout, because apparently we're seeing a lot of this out there.
It's a lot.
All right, thanks, Sophia. can still see it as you drive by the Boise airport, either on the interstate or on the side roads, that devastating collapsed hangar that killed 3 people. But not for long. They're going to start taking that thing down this week. Morgan Romero tells us more about it and other 208 news in today's 411.
Nearly 5 months after the deadly hangar collapse at the Boise airport, the contractor will start demolition this week. Big D Builders, the steel company who was building the hangar at the time of the collapse, says OSHA released the site and other inspections are complete. Now it's time to move as they continue to mourn those who died. Earlier this month, the families of 2 of the victims filed a notice of their intent to sue the city of Boise for $30 million. Just weeks after Chad Daybell was sentenced to death for the murders of his first wife and his current wife's 2 children, Judge Stephen Boyce permanently sealed much of the evidence from his trial. Boyce says the court has already received multiple requests for the evidence, mainly from true crime bloggers and YouTubers. He sealed the documents to protect the victims' families from further trauma. Fire investigators said an e-bike caused the Coeur d'Alene Police Storage Building to burn down on June 9th. The Idaho State Fire Marshal's office said fire pattern analysis showed a, quote, catastrophic failure of the lithium-ion battery pack from a recently acquired police e-bike. The building that burned down housed police equipment, computer equipment, and several vehicles. The fire marshal ruled the fire an accident. And that's the 411 on the 208. I'm Morgan Romero.
Great shots in Idaho, and I'll take you up to a high elevation as well. This is almost on top of Baldy's, so it's just below the Sun Valley Roundhouse. Down, of course, is Ketchum. And you can see You know, we've been used to looking at this shot through the winter with all the snow there and even graded runs, but that's not the case anymore. The heat has finally gotten to most mountain locations. It's melted down. However, this morning, not a surprise. Forecast lows are for a cold morning, but I hope things survived around your house when you think of 38 degrees in Caldwell, 37 in Nampa. Everybody's starting on the gardens for this year. 42 degrees for Boise, Twin Falls with 36 degrees. So you can see those temperatures were down for this morning. Now they're going to be around 50 degrees for tonight. We're in this area of cold air, and a lot of people are just looking at this across the country and thinking this would be a great spot to be in. When you look at 71 degrees for Boise. Down here in Phoenix, not as hot as usual at this time, but it's still at a 102. And then the East Coast, here's the heat wave we've been hearing a lot about, and it extends even up here into Canada, Toronto and some of those cities as well, with temperatures into the 80s as well as the 90s, high humidity. And of course, this is going to last for a while. It is. This will give them a little brief break, but they're going to have some of this heat as it starts out along the East Coast. We're starting there. We're getting up to the lower 70s for today. Tomorrow, anticipate those temperatures up around 80 degrees, and that'll be some of the changes that'll be coming our way. So tomorrow, there's your 84. Now you see those temperatures up, and whoa, look at this, okay? This could be the extreme when it comes to our taking a look at some of our models as far as the high temperature up to 100 degrees. After that, it pretty much lightens up just a little bit, and then the following Friday, temperatures come down somewhere into the mid-80s. So a quick look here. You can see that we do have some showers here in the Central Mountains. Most of that, of course, is moving out of our area. You can see it moving up into Montana there as well. If you look at the futurecast, that moves eastward. We're just drying up, okay? With that drying up, that brings us to this 7-day forecast. Instead of windy, we'll have some light winds, and we're looking at about 5 to 10, maybe some gusts to 15 for the entire week. And as you take a look at some of these temperatures, I'm not going for quite 100 on Saturday and Sunday, but it's pretty close. So close, I don't know if it makes much of any difference, but we are heating up as this week goes on. And we wanted to tell you that, of course, the sunshine will be with us. And, of course, the heat will last at least into the first part of next week as we see some of those temperatures dropping to the lower 90s.
I guess we could call it Feel Good Friday. It's not Friday, but just like Friday, we got Joe Paris right here because not always the subject of news, but you've got some news today.
I am very happy to announce that my wife Haley and I will be having a baby boy coming up in November.
Nice. How did you find this out? Like, when did you find this out?
You know, I've had to keep this a secret as best as I could for, I guess, oh gosh, like 6 weeks. It's been tough. My wife surprised her dad on Father's Day.
Perfect.
And
you got photos?
We got some great photos. Or KTVB's Emma Adams took those great photos. But yeah, Haley and I are really excited to start this new exciting adventure. And we mentioned this on the news at 4, and I've just seen so many kind messages from the community and everyone. And I honestly just wasn't expecting this type of support. And it's just been overwhelming, honestly. But honestly, Brian, standing here with you, I think about game nights that I've had with your family and you and your kids. And that's what I look forward to most is, of course, you know, the kid's not going to be ready to play games for a few years, but
probably not.
These special family nights. And I've seen you and your family do that. And have Andrew and I over. And that's what I look forward to most.
You're excited and overwhelmed now. Just wait until November.
Yes.
You wait.
Just in time for November sweeps in the election, Brian.
Yeah, it'll all
What a
come out.
month of November it'll be for me.
And Thanksgiving.
And Thanksgiving. Well, the baby's supposed to come the week of Thanksgiving, so we'll see if it's a turkey fan or if it can wait until after.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we got some technology issues with our comments for this afternoon, but we're going to have just some of them thrown at me here. Let's start with the first one. This one here. All right, Democrats are pushing to allow illegals to vote around the country. Rubel is playing games by saying non-citizens are not voting in large numbers in Idaho. Illegals and non-citizens should not vote in any election, period. Cliff in Boise. Cliff, I challenge you to bring forth any evidence of non-citizens voting in Idaho in large numbers. I challenge you. Let's go to the next one. When it comes to the wording on U.S. citizen only being able to vote in all elections in the state, it would make sense to clarify that. It should say only state elections. If not, definitely will be going to court, says Scott. Let's move on here to the next one. Shooting lasers at weeds. How ridiculous. I like the taste of bug spray on my onions, says Joe Ford. Of course you do. As a consumer, I'd rather eat produce that used lasers to weed than herbicides. Chuck on the opposite side of that onion field in that debate. Please mention hemlock smoke is also toxic. Do not burn it at any time, because that is in response to the question from before when they said, what do we do with this hemlock that's in our yard? Do we burn it? How do we get rid of it? Put it in a receptacle and get rid of it. But again, don't touch it with your bare hands, or at least wash your hands. But do not burn it either, because those fumes, yes, those are also toxic.